The House by Diana Avalon. "I tell you, the house ate him," Mrs. Worthing said dramatically. She was a woman in her 60s with graying hair. "Ate him? Mrs. Worthing, you have quite an imagination. Whatever gives you that idea? I've never heard of houses eating people, or eating anything else for that matter. I just can't believe this house had anything to do with Uncle Tom's death." It was early in the morning. The sun shone through the windows, illuminating the living room where we were seated. I was wearing old faded blue jeans, and Mrs. Worthing was attired in a bright print dress. We were chatting over cookies and coffee. "Ah, yes, Tom Bracken was your husband's uncle, right? Well, my dear, do you know how he died?" "I understand it was a heart attack. He had a history of heart trouble," I said. "The police never found a body. He mysteriously disappeared one stormy night, never seen again," she said. I'd been living in the house almost a week now. I had inherited it from my deceased husband. When Bill was alive, we'd always lived in the city, in an apartment where he was just a few minutes from his job. I'd never seen the house while he was alive. He'd refused to bring me out here to show it to me, telling me it was old and run down and not fit to live in. Untrue. The house was marvelously preserved despite its old age. It was a 2-story house with a basement and an attic. The paint seemed almost new, although I knew that it had not been painted during the 10 years that Bill had owned it. When I saw the place, I instantly fell in love with it and decided to move here and give up the apartment. Bill's insurance had left me some money, which I planned to invest. Maybe I could start my own business. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do exactly, but while I decided the job I'd gotten at the local library would keep food in the fridge. "Haven't you heard about how all the previous owners mysteriously disappeared? Always during a bad storm. Disappeared without a trace. They were always alone, except for one owner. Supposedly, he and his whole family disappeared one stormy night. It's really fascinating." She placed her cup down on the table. "Have you noticed anything odd or out of the ordinary?" "No, nothing odd has happened to me, and I might point out that my husband, the owner before me, did not disappear. He was killed in an auto accident." "Oh, I'm so sorry. But he didn't actually live here, did he?" "No, in the 7 years we were married. We never came here. He had no desire to live here or even visit. I think it had something to do with the fact that his uncle died in this house." "I've been reading stories about your family and this house for quite some time," she said, "preparatory to writing my book on haunted houses and other unexplained phenomenon." She cleared her throat before continuing. "The first records on the house show that Matthias Hoover and his family lived here. One night there was a horrible storm. That same night, he and his whole family disappeared without any warning, never to be seen again." Ms. Worthing bit into a cookie. "The house was taken over by his nephew, Andrew Bracken, and his young wife, Emily. Andrew, a doctor, was away from home one night tending to a woman giving birth. There was a bad storm. Andrew never saw his wife again. No one saw her leave or knew her whereabouts." She took a sip of coffee. "Andrew closed up the house and moved to the city, where he married a second time. They had 2 sons, Thomas and Edward Bracken. Edward, you know, was your husband's father. Thomas never married, but when his father died, he took the house, scoffing at the tales of ghosts and people disappearing." She wiped her mouth with a napkin. "Tom, your husband's uncle, lived here about 20 years, longer than anyone else, but the house finally got him. He disappeared too. I thought no one was in danger since no one lived here these past 10 years, but when I heard that you had moved in, I thought I should warn you. Now, Mrs. Worthing, I just don't believe in ghosts or houses that make people disappear. Why, just last night there was a bad storm, and I'm still here. It will get you eventually." She stood up. Would you let me look around? Do you have any of Tom Bracken's possessions? Some clue to his disappearance? I'll show you around the house and Tom's old room. All his clothing is still there. I stood up. This is the living room, of course. Some of this furniture is mine, but I sold most of our stuff after Bill's death. I moved out into the hall, and she followed. I walked into the dining room across the hall. This is the dining room. So far I haven't used it. It's still quite dusty. I haven't cleaned it yet. I showed her the kitchen and the library. Tom was evidently an avid reader, particularly of science fiction. This is quite a good collection. He even read some occult material. I handed her a book on poltergeists, which she glanced at curiously before she put it back on the shelf. Perhaps he knew the place was haunted and found a way to keep whatever it is from getting him, but it got him in the end, she said. We went upstairs and I showed her Tom's room. It was dusty. I hadn't touched it. Here his interest in books showed as well. Beside his bed was a stack of books. I glanced at the titles. I saw his diary just as Mrs. Worthing was reaching for it. "My stars!" she exclaimed. "What luck! This may contain a clue to his disappearance." She was already shuffling through the pages. "It will take a while to read it all. May I borrow it?" "Well, it's part of my husband's family history, so shouldn't leave the house. You may drop by any time to read it, however." "I'd like to get started reading it now then." I nodded consent. "Thank you. I'm sure that this will provide me with some interesting information." We went back to the living room, where she sat down and began to read, occasionally jotting notes in a small spiral notebook. I went to the kitchen to fix some sandwiches. She spent about an hour reading, and then I suggested we take a break for lunch. As we munched on sandwiches, she briefed me on what she had found so far. Evidently, Tom Bracken was aware of the strangeness of this house soon after moving in. Here's an entry where his cat disappeared while he was away during a storm. She brushed crumbs from her mouth. He mentions the history of the house and the disappearances. This is really fascinating reading. I must get back to it. She went into the living room. I'd been doubtful about her claims until she showed me some of the entries. Now I began to wonder. We spent the afternoon reading. I selected a science fiction book from the library, and Ms. Worthing spent it reading the diary. After a while, I became bored and stepped out for some fresh air. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. I could smell the flowers blooming nearby. I heard a cry from inside and hurried to see what the commotion was about. "My dear, a discovery! You must read this." She handed me the diary, and I sat down and started reading silently. "I had the strangest experience of my life. I knew that all the disappearances occurred during a storm, but I had no idea why or how until now," the diary read. "There was a storm last night. The electricity went out. So having nothing to do, I sat on the porch to watch the storm. Soon it became so violent I had to come back inside. Just as I crossed the threshold, there was a loud noise behind me, like lightning hitting the earth. It nearly knocked me off my feet. I whirled around and saw a strange sight. Beyond my front door was something so fantastic that no one could ever believe me unless they were to experience it for themselves. It was like another world. The sky was different, and there were 2 moons. Neither one was our own. No, it was a very different place. Not sure what would have happened to me had I stepped out into that alien landscape. The grass on the ground was not green, but a purple color. Perhaps this strange place took Father's first wife from him. If she had stepped out there, she might not have been able to return or even survive. Somehow, the house itself protected me from the alien atmosphere. The storm may have been a trigger. Luckily, there was another loud noise, and a violent tremor thrust me back into this world, for the scene changed to this familiar place. Here I stopped reading and looked up at Ms. Worthing. "Isn't it fantastic?" she said. "I was right. This house does things out of the ordinary, and people disappear. Can you doubt it any longer?" she exclaimed. I was speechless. Could this be possible? If so, we could be in danger. Then I remembered the impending storm. Oh my God! The sky! I jumped up and started running towards the front door, yelling over my shoulder at her. "We must get out of here! There's a storm on its way!" I reached the front door just as it hit. The impact threw me back against the stairs. The door had burst open. Ms. Worthing was in the entrance to the living room, her mouth wide open, staring at the open doorway. The landscape outside the house had changed. It was not Mother Earth. I got up and went over to the open doorway. The ground was purple and the sky red. A bloody sun was setting in the sky. The vegetation was purple, some with pink blossoms. I quickly slammed the door shut. Fear rose in my throat, and I felt like screaming hysterically. Ms. Worthing grabbed my arm. Her trembling matched my own. "My dear, I feel quite ill. Did you see what I saw, or was I hallucinating?" "I saw it too. I need to sit down." I walked over to the staircase and sat on one of the steps and tried to still my shaking hands. My stomach felt queasy. "Maybe we should have a drink. Do you have anything stronger than soda pop?" Ms. Worthing had come up beside me. "Look in the dining room. I thought I saw some wine in there." She went off into the dining room. "Sarah, come here!" I went in. She was staring at the dining room window that faced the western side of the house. Beyond the window, the sky, ground, everything was an intense blue. I blinked. It was a vast, rolling ocean, no land to be seen. The dining room window on the front of the house revealed the purple landscape. I found a chair and sat down. "Did you find that wine?" "Here it is. Let me find a glass." She went off to the kitchen. Then she screamed, and I heard the tinkle of breaking glass. I rushed in to see what had happened. Ms. Worthing had dropped the wine. It looked like blood all over the floor. "What's the matter?" She was staring at the window. It was completely dark. "There's something out there. It looked right at me. What if it breaks the glass?" she yelled hysterically. "Let's hope it doesn't. Let's hope it can't. I suggest we move out of this room, close the door, and lock it." I was already out of the room, and she didn't waste any time in following me. What did it look like? I closed and locked the door. Horrible. "Sarah, are we ever going to get back to our world? If we stay here, that thing might break through and get us." Her voice had risen hysterically, and she was sobbing now. I put my arms around her and patted her back. "Don't worry. Tom was able to return. We'll just have to wait for another storm to trigger it. We shouldn't panic and run outside, for we might be left behind like the others. Let's go check the rest of the windows. It will give us something to do, and we should discover the options available to us." I released her. "We need to close the door in the hallway that enters the kitchen." We went into the hallway. I started to close the kitchen door when we heard breaking glass from within. Ms. Worthing screamed hysterically. I didn't look, but slammed the door and locked it with trembling hands. "Let's go into the living room and sit down. Maybe the locks will hold." We turned to do so. "Do you smell something?" Ms. Worthing had stopped it in the hallway. I sniffed. She was right. There was a foul, rotten odor permeating the air. I turned my head towards the kitchen door. Dark, smoky vapor was seeping under the crack at the bottom of the door. "Oh no," I screamed. "It's coming under the door. Let's get out of here." I ran towards the front door. Miss Worthing was right behind me. We were through, and I took a deep breath. I didn't die. We were already running, but the question was, where should we go? The red sky was overcast. It looked like a storm was approaching. If it broke while we were out here, the house might disappear. I grabbed Mrs. Worthing's arm, and we stopped to look back at the house. The dark creature floated in front of the house. It was mostly shapeless, but had limbs where one would expect arms. It obviously didn't need legs. This creature looked decidedly evil, not to mention that it stank. We could smell it even at this distance. It started to rain. The creature was hesitating. It looked different somehow. It seemed to sniff or test the air. Then the rain began to come down hard. The creature started to scream, a loud, howling, agonizing scream like a soul in hell. The water seemed to cause it to smoke. As we watched, it started to fold in upon itself, become smaller and smaller, until it finally blinked out of existence. There was a flash of lightning and the roll of thunder. "Quick! Get back inside, fast!" I screamed above the noise as we ran toward the house. I pushed Ms. Worthing ahead of me. I was half in, half out when it hit. The impact threw me completely inside. Ms. Worthing helped me up. We were covered with cuts and bruises, but I didn't feel them. I looked out the window, and our sun was shining brightly. I turned to Ms. Worthing and smiled. "Ms. Worthing, this window has such a wonderful view."